Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at how to improve our creative writing. Now this is actually part 2 of the 2 videos looking at how to do this from the same stimulus, so if you haven't done so already, please can you check out our previous video, Creative Writing Part 1. Here for the image from last lesson. What makes creative writing effective? So think about the kind of things we went through on our previous video. We went through some of the key techniques that are needed as well, and we also looked at this image in more detail. We actually went through one example, and now what we're going to do is we're going to build on that. We're going to look at the example and the actual comments that you get from the mark scheme, so you can start using this to apply it to your own understanding and write your own creative response. By the end of the video, you'll be able to recall the key techniques needed for creative writing, understand how to beat the mark scheme, and finally, apply your understanding to an exam style question. Now that we've looked at that first response, we've got a second response using the same kind of stimulus. I just wanted to think if there's been any improvements compared to the first one. Again, all we're doing is giving this a mark out of 24, so try and think what kind of mark would you give this. We're just focusing on the content and the organization, so that 24 marks, not focusing on the technical accuracy. So it says then, the sky was filled with a blanket of smoke as Holly gripped tightly onto Tom. A whole year seemed to pass before the train was able to drag itself to where they were waiting. Out of the corner of her eye, Holly could see a bead of sweat making its slow descent down Tom's face. She squeezed his hand reassuringly, but only felt the slightest twitch of acknowledgement in return. As the door snapped shut behind them, Holly finally allowed herself a sigh of relief. Yes, the seats were stained with like something from a crime scene. Yes, there was the overwhelming mixture of urine and vomit in the air, but at least they were safe. They had made it onto the train. Nothing could stop them now. So when we have a look at that, we'll try and think about the kind of things that would actually award it a reasonable mark. Okay, so when we look at the feedback, this is where we go with the mark scheme, and you can see straight away that the language has changed. Instead of having some techniques, we've actually can see that they're now using a range of successful linguistic devices. So it means they've used a lot more language techniques in a much more sophisticated way. We also have a sophisticated vocabulary, so the words they're using are much more effective as well. We have now coherent paragraphs with integrated discord markers. So this response instead would have 16 out of 18 if it is sustained, if it is continued. So remember, this is just out of 24, so we're not marking the whole available marks for this question, but just on the basis of that, this is going to be such a better response. Now, if we actually think about the technical things that were working in that response, there was a lot of things that were happening there. There was a lot more showing and not telling. The techniques were far more developed, and ultimately they'd slowed down their writing. That's one of my biggest tips, really. Just make sure that when you are doing your creative writing, you're taking it nice and slow, you're taking your time, and you're not rushing through it. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to have a look at a few comprehension questions to see if you're able to identify the key kind of techniques that were used in that response. Quick fire questions. Answer the questions below to test your understanding. Number 1. Identify where the writer has used a metaphor. Number 2. Identify where the writer has used personification. Number 3. Has the extract used a cliffhanger or a resolution? Try and justify your answers. Number 4. Where has the writer used a hyperbole? And number 5. Where has the writer used sensory language? So if you need to pause the video here, go back and forth, please feel free to do so. It's all about understanding how to actually construct an effective piece of creative writing and what techniques will go towards getting us a higher grade in the assessment. Class feedback. Check your understanding against the answers below. So for number 1 then, identify where the writer has used a metaphor. The metaphor we have there is the sky was filled with a blanket of smoke. Now this would be a metaphor because there's not literally a blanket of smoke, it's just been used to create the impression that there is a lot of smoke in the air. Number 2, we're looking at where the writer used personification, so before the train was able to drag itself to where they were waiting. Number 3, we're looking for a cliffhanger or a resolution. If you're not too sure what we mean by this, a cliffhanger is where the story ends, where we're not sure what has happened, right? We're left with a few questions at the end. And a resolution is where everything has been tied up in a neat little bow. So really you could go either way with this one. So you could first of all say a resolution, but it's about how you justify it. Now this is going to be really important as well, especially if you're thinking about paper 1, question 3, that asks you to talk about structure. A lot of the time it does come down to how you can justify your answer. So it's a resolution. They're clearly trying to escape something and are now safe, right? So we had a problem, the problem has now been resolved. However, you could also say it's a cliffhanger. So we don't know what the characters are running away from, and we don't know if this person or thing might catch up with them later on in the story. Number 3, where has the writer used a hyperbole? If you're not sure what I mean by that, we're talking about over-exaggeration. So a whole year seemed to pass. Okay, and the final one, where has the writer used sensory language? So you've got a few different options you could choose from here. The one that I went with was an overwhelming mixture of urine and vomit in the air. Of course, that would be engaging the sense of smell. Okay, so once you've finished checking your answers, we're going to move on. We're going to think about how you can take that final response we looked at, that one that was achieving quite a lot in terms of the content and the organisation, how we can build on that and actually apply it to your own writing as well. So this is what I'd like to do next then. We're introducing a conflict in our story. I'd like you to pick a number from 1 to 4, try and do it randomly, and just write the next part of the response. A big thing with creative writing is that really what we're actually writing in terms of the story and where it goes isn't massively important. The main thing we want to focus on is actually the language techniques and the structure of our writing as well. So you have the options from 1 to 4. You've just got to pick one scenario to carry on the writing. So if you chose number 1, it is the characters get on the train and realise they don't have any money. So that's introducing a conflict. The train travels 200 yards and then breaks down. Again, another conflict that can take this story further. You realise you haven't eaten anything for 12 hours and head for the dining car. Now this might seem like a bit of a boring option. However, something to think about with your creative writing is always go to the extremes. So rather than say that this person is a bit peckish, a little bit hungry, say they're ravenous, say they're starving, and really take your time to develop that description and really describe the sensations of when they finally eat and what that must feel like in their gut and in their stomach as they're finally allowed to eat that food. Really think about how you can develop that description. And number 4, the train starts to pick up speed. At the other end of the carriage, a mysterious figure is staring at you. So all of those are good potential things to talk about in terms of developing your writing further. If you've got any other ideas, you can also embed that in as well. The main thing we want to focus on is improving the content in terms of the Go Massive techniques and any other techniques you know, but also thinking about how you're organizing it as well. Once you've had a go at this, it'll be a good idea to actually give yourself a bit of feedback, or you can actually get in touch and happily mark any response that you write if you're looking for any feedback, especially as we approach the exam season. In order to make sure you've done a good response, you can use this criteria. So have you used a range of language techniques? Have you wrote in a clear and coherent manner? Have you used a range of ambitious vocabulary? And do you have a good standard of spelling, grammar, and punctuation? If you need any additional support or help, the new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, leave us a comment below or visit our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks ever so much for listening, guys, and all the best with your work and revision in the future. Bye bye.